Get back on that coach. This town has no use for a woman like you. Vivian Hale didn't flinch. She set her one leather bag down in the mud, looked the man dead in the eye, and answered, "I'm not here to be used. I'm here to work." Behind her, the stagecoach driver whipped his horses and left her standing alone in Black Ridge, a town that hated her before it knew her name. They called her many things that first hour: bride, scandal, stranger. She would let them believe whatever kept them talking, because the truth was coming, and it would break every one of them. If you're watching this, subscribe and stay with me to the very end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. The coach was gone before Vivian could ask the driver to wait, and the dust it kicked up settled over her shoulders like the town had already decided to bury her. The man who'd told her to leave hadn't moved. He was heavy-set, red-faced, with a badge pinned crooked to his coat, and he stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt like a gate meant to keep her out. "You deaf girl," he said. "I told you." "You told me your opinion," Vivian said. "I heard it. Now I'd like directions to Boone Ranch." That stopped him. Not the words, the calm behind them. Men in Black Ridge were used to women who cried, argued, or begged. They had no answer for one who simply waited. "Boone Ranch," he repeated slowly, like he was tasting something gone bad. "What business does a woman like you have at Boone Ranch?" "Employment." A laugh came out of him, sharp and mean. "Employment. That what they're calling it now." Vivian picked her bag back up out of the mud. She didn't wipe it clean. She didn't give him the satisfaction of watching her care. "If you won't point me the way, someone else will," she said. "It's a small town. I'll manage." She walked past him. That was the thing that seemed to offend him most, that she walked past him, not around him, as if he were a fence post and not the law. By the time she reached the main street, they were already watching. She could feel it the way a person feels cold before they see the frost. The shift of curtains, the pause of a broom, the way two women outside the general store stopped mid-sentence to stare. A man carrying a sack of feed set it down slowly, forgetting the weight of it. A boy of maybe 10 pointed at her, and his mother slapped his hand down and pulled him against her skirt. Vivian kept walking. She had learned a long time ago that the trick to being stared at was to give them nothing to feed on. No fear, no shame, no apology. Let them build their story out of empty air, and eventually the story would collapse for lack of anything to stand on. But Black Ridge, she was beginning to understand, did not need anything to stand on. It had plenty. "You'll want to keep moving whatever you are." The voice came from a woman on the porch of the largest building on the street. A woman in dark, expensive fabric, her gray hair pinned so tight it seemed to pull the kindness out of her face. She held herself the way wealthy people did in poor towns, as if the dust wouldn't dare touch her. "I'm looking for Boone Ranch," Vivian said. "Ma'am?" The ma'am was a small courtesy. It cost her nothing. But the woman took it like an insult, her eyes narrowing. "I know exactly where you're going," the woman said. "The whole town knows, dear. A single woman, no husband, no family. No letter of introduction, arriving to live on a ranch full of men." She let the word live hang in the air like smoke. "We are a decent town. We protect our children from what they might see. And what you are is not something children should see." Vivian had heard versions of this speech in 3 towns before this one. She'd stopped being surprised by it in the second. "And what am I?" Vivian asked. The woman smiled without warmth. "You know what you are." "I know I'm a cook," Vivian said. "I know I'm hungry, and I know it's a long walk. If protecting your children is your concern, then you might tell me the road so I stop standing here where they can see me." For half a second, something flickered behind the woman's eyes. Not respect exactly, but the recognition one predator gives another. Then it was gone, replaced by cold. "Dorothea Crane," the woman said, as if the name itself were a warning. "You'll come to know it. Everyone here does." "Vivian Hale," Vivian said. "I doubt you'll need it." "North Road, past the church. You'll smell the cattle before you see the house." Dorothea turned to go back inside, then paused. He won't hire you, you know. Silas Boone is many things, but he is not a fool. And even a fool would think twice about the whispers a woman like you brings. Then I've walked a long way for nothing, Vivian said. I've done that before. I'll survive it again. She left Dorothea Crane standing on her porch, and she felt the woman watching her the whole length of the street, the way a spider watches a fly. It hasn't decided whether to eat yet. Tab. The north road was longer than past the church had made it sound. By the time the ranch came into view, the light had gone gold and low, and Vivian's feet had blistered inside boots that had walked too many towns already. She heard the men before she saw them, the rough call of voices, the complaint of a gate, the low grumble of cattle. And then she was at the edge of it, and a boy of maybe 19 with a face full of sun looked up, saw her, and dropped the coil of rope in his hands. He said. I'm looking for Silas Boone, Vivian said. The boy, she would learn his name was Pip, looked at her the way a man looks at a comet, like he wasn't sure if he was seeing something wonderful or something that meant the world was ending. He's at the, I'll get him, ma'am, I'll get him. He ran. He actually ran, which told Vivian more about Silas Boone than any description could have. A man whose hired hands ran to warn him of a stranger was either respected or feared, and in her experience the two were rarely far apart. She waited. She did not sit, though there was a bench. She did not fix her hair, though the wind had ruined it. She stood with her bag in her hand like a woman who could turn and leave at any moment and lose nothing, which was very nearly the truth. He came around the side of the barn, and she knew him at once, not because anyone had described him, but because a man walks differently when a place belongs to him. Silas Boone moved like the ground had agreed to hold him up. He was tall, worn, maybe 35, with the kind of face that had stopped expecting good news a long time ago. He stopped a good 10 feet from her, and the first thing he did was look past her for the wagon, the husband, the man who must have brought her. When he found no one, his jaw tightened. You're lost, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a hope. No, Vivian said. I'm exactly where I meant to be if you're Silas Boone. I'm Boone. Then I'm here about the cook. Something crossed his face. Confusion, then something colder underneath it. What cook? The position, Vivian said. The advertisement. She reached into her bag, and every man in earshot tensed, as if a woman reaching into a bag were a thing to be afraid of. She drew out a folded paper worn soft at the creases from being read too many times. She held it out. You're looking for a cook. I'm a cook. I've come a long way to say so. Silas didn't take the paper. He stared at it like it might bite. I never posted for a cook, he said. The words dropped into the quiet, and something in Vivian's chest went still and careful. You did, she said. It ran in the Cheyenne paper. Cook wanted Boone Ranch Black Ridge room, and board, and fair wage. I answered it. I got a reply. I have the reply. She pulled out a second paper. This one he took slowly, and she watched his eyes move down the page, and she watched them stop. This isn't my hand, Silas said quietly. It's signed with your name. I don't care what it's signed with. I didn't write this. He looked up at her, and for the first time there was something other than suspicion in his face. There was alarm. Somebody wrote to you in my name. Somebody brought you here, and it wasn't me. Vivian had crossed 200 miles on the strength of that letter. She had spent nearly the last of her money on the coach fare. She had arrived in a town that hated her, been called a scandal by a stranger, and walked until her feet bled, all on the promise of a job that she now understood did not exist. She should have been afraid. She should have felt the floor drop out from under her. Instead, a strange cold clarity came over her, the kind she'd learned to trust more than any comfort. Then we both got played, she said. The difference is you're standing on your own land. I'm standing on nothing. Silas Boone stared at her, and behind him, the ranch hands had gone silent, and somewhere in the golden light a door opened, and a small voice said, Papa, who's that? The girl couldn't have been more than 8. She came out from behind the barn slowly, one hand still on the wood, watching Vivian with the enormous, unblinking attention that only children and cats ever really give a stranger. "Go back inside, Lena," Silas said, and his voice changed completely. It went careful, went soft, the way a hard man's voice only ever goes for one person in the world. "But who is she?" "Lena." The girl didn't move. Her eyes stayed on Vivian, and Vivian, who had spent the last hour keeping her face empty for a whole town of adults, found she couldn't do it for this one child. She crouched slowly so she wasn't looming. "My name's Vivian," she said. "I came here looking for work. Turns out there might not be any. So I'll be moving along soon, and you won't have to wonder about me." The girl frowned, and there was a whole storm working behind her small face. "You talk different," Lena said. "You don't talk like everybody here. I've been a lot of places. Are you the one who's supposed to cook?" Vivian went still. She looked up at Silas, and his face had gone tight and strange. "Who told you someone was coming to cook, Lena?" he asked. The girl scuffed her boot in the dirt. "The letter lady," she mumbled. "She came when you were at the auction. She said a cook was coming, and I should be ready to be nice. She said if I was good, maybe you wouldn't be sad anymore." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Vivian had heard all day. Silas crouched down to his daughter's level, and his voice was gentle, but there was steel underneath it. "What Lady Lena? What did she look like?" "Fancy," Lena said. "Gray hair, real straight. She smelled like the church." Vivian felt it click into place like a key in a lock. Dorothea Crane. The woman who'd known exactly where she was going. The woman who'd said he won't hire you, not as a guess, but as a plan already set in motion. The woman who'd bothered to come out to a ranch to prepare a grieving child for a cook who was never asked for. She had been brought here on purpose, not by accident, not by chance. Someone had wanted her here, standing in this yard at this ranch in front of this town, precisely so they could point at her and call her exactly what Dorothea had already called her on the porch. A scandal. A single woman delivered to a widower's door so the whole town could watch what happened next. Vivian Hale had been many things in her 26 years. She had been poor, hungry, alone, and unwanted. But she had never before been a weapon aimed at someone else. "You've been set up," she said, quietly standing. "Both of us. Somebody in that town wanted a reason to burn you, Mr. Boone, and I was the match." Silas straightened slowly. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in him seemed to be doing hard arithmetic. "Get back on the road tonight, and none of this matters," he said. "You leave, the story dies. You stay." "The story's already alive," Vivian cut in. "It was alive the second I stepped off that coach. Your sheriff's already told half the street a woman came asking for Boone Ranch. Your Dorothea Crane watched me walk this whole way. I could turn around and walk back to Cheyenne tonight, and the town would still spend a month talking about the scandal that arrived and left. You think leaving saves you? Leaving just means they get to make up the ending themselves." Silas Boone was a man who had spent a decade learning that the world took things from you, whether you fought or not. And here was a stranger, dust-covered and blistered, telling him a truth he'd been avoiding all afternoon. "So what?" he said. "You're telling me to hire you, to do the exact thing they want the story to be." "I'm telling you," Vivian said, "that if they're going to call me your scandal no matter what I do, I'd at least like to be paid to cook while they do it." For one held breath, nobody moved. The sun was almost down. The cattle grumbled. Pip stood by the barn with his mouth open, and the other men watched their boss the way men watch a storm to see which way it's going to break. Then from behind, Silas Lena's small hand slipped into her father's. "I'm hungry, Papa," she said, and Vivian watched Silas Boone lose an argument he'd never planned to have. He didn't say yes. That wasn't his way she'd learn. What he said was, "Kitchen's a wreck. There's no cook because the last one quit 6 months ago, and I never replaced her. If you can find something in there worth eating tonight, we'll talk in the morning. If you can't, there's a bunkhouse you can use and you're gone at first light. That's all I'm offering." "That's all I'm asking," Vivian said. The kitchen was worse than a wreck. It was a graveyard, a place where a household had died a slow death after the woman who ran it was gone. There were dishes crusted with meals long forgotten. There was a stove choked with cold ash. There was flour with weevils in it, and a smell that told her something in a corner had died and been ignored. A lesser cook would have wept. Vivian rolled up her sleeves. "You," she said to Pip, who had followed her inside like a lost dog. "What's your name?" "Pip, ma'am." "Pip is there a cellar? Anything salted, anything smoked, anything that hasn't gone to rot." There's a smokehouse. And potatoes. Lots of potatoes. And Mr. Boone shot a couple of birds this morning. They're hanging out back." "Then we have everything," Vivian said. "Get me the birds and the potatoes, and find me an onion if there's an onion in this whole territory." Pip ran. She worked. She worked the way some people pray, completely wordlessly, with her whole body. She scoured the stove and coaxed a fire into it. She cleaned a pot until it shone. She plucked and dressed the birds with hands that had done it 1,000 times. She peeled potatoes so fast the skins fell in a single ribbon. She found dried herbs gone brittle in a jar and crushed them between her palms and smelled them and made a decision. The men drifted in one by one, first to gawk, then to smell, then to sit. They pretended they'd come for other reasons. They came because for 6 months this ranch had eaten cold beans and burnt biscuits, and something was happening in that kitchen that none of them had smelled since a woman named Mary Boone had been alive. Nobody said that name out loud, but Vivian could feel it in the room, the ghost of the last woman who'd cooked here, and she was careful, so careful not to touch it. Silas didn't come in. She noticed that. He stayed out in the yard past dark, and she understood without being told that walking into that kitchen and smelling supper again was a thing he wasn't ready to do. But Lena came. The girl sat on a stool in the corner and watched Vivian work with that same unblinking attention, and after a long while she said, "My mama used to sing when she cooked." Vivian's hands slowed. She did not stop working because she'd learned that children tell you the deepest things when you don't turn and look at them. "Did she?" Vivian said. "You don't sing." "No," Vivian said. "I never learned, but I could hum if it wouldn't bother you." Lena thought about this with great seriousness. "It wouldn't bother me." So Vivian hummed no song in particular, just a low, tuneless warmth, and she stirred the pot, and a grieving child sat in the corner of a dead kitchen, and for the first time in a long time, did not feel completely alone. When the food was ready, the men ate like it was a sacrament. Nobody spoke for the first few minutes. There was only the sound of spoons and the small, involuntary noises that hungry men make when they taste something good after months of tasting nothing. One of the older hands, a grizzled man named Cutter, who'd said not one word to her all evening, stopped halfway through his bowl and stared into it like it had told him something. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" he said. It came out rough, almost angry, the way gratitude sometimes does from men who aren't practiced at it. "Everywhere," Vivian said. "Nowhere. Kitchens don't care where you come from. You either feed people or you don't." "Well," Cutter went back to his bowl. "You do." It was from a man like Cutter, a coronation. Vivian didn't sit to eat with them. She stood by the stove, keeping the pot warm for the ones still coming in, and she watched them, and she let herself feel just for a moment, just quietly. The thing she almost never let herself feel. That maybe this time, in this ruined kitchen, at the edge of a town that hated her, she had found a place she could hold on to. That was when Silas finally came in. He stopped in the doorway. The room went a little quieter, the men glancing between their boss and the pot, and the woman who'd filled it. Silas looked at the fire in the clean stove. He looked at the shining pot. He looked at his daughter sitting on her stool with color in her cheeks and a bowl in her lap, humming under her breath, humming for the first time since the funeral. Vivian watched the fight go across his face. She watched him want to be glad and be afraid of being glad at the same time. She'd seen that look before on people who'd learned that every good thing was just a bill that hadn't come due yet. "You'll want to eat," she said to give him somewhere to put his hands. "There's plenty," He crossed the room. She filled a bowl. He took it, and instead of sitting with the men, he stood beside her at the stove, and for a moment they were two people looking at the same fire. "They'll come for you tomorrow," he said low, just for her. "You understand that? The town, Crane. They set this in motion, and they won't let it just die because supper was good. This is going to get ugly." "I know. Dorothea Crane has run this town for 20 years. She decides who's decent and who isn't. She's buried better people than you and me under a pile of whispers." "I know," Vivian said again. Silas looked at her sidelong. "You know a lot for someone who got off the coach 3 hours ago." "I know women like Dorothea Crane," Vivian said. "I've met one in every town I've ever passed through. They're not hard to understand. They just want to be the one who decides. Give them a woman they can't decide about, and they lose their minds." She met his eyes. "I'm not going to make it easy for her to decide about me." Silas Boone looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something Vivian hadn't seen him do all day. He almost smiled. "Eat something," he said. "You look like you walked from Cheyenne." "I nearly did." "There's a room off the kitchen. Was the last cook's. It's yours tonight." He paused. "We'll talk about the rest in the morning." It wasn't yes, but it wasn't the road either. Peg. She should have slept. She'd earned it. But past midnight, when the ranch had gone quiet, and the men had stumbled off to their bunks, with full stomachs, Vivian found she couldn't lie still. She got up. She went back to the kitchen. Her kitchen. She was already thinking of it dangerously, to bank the fire and set the bread to rise for morning, because a woman who wanted a job she hadn't been given yet made herself indispensable before anyone thought to ask her to. She wasn't the only one awake. Lena was sitting at the table in her nightgown, small feet swinging, and the sight of her out of bed at this hour put a bolt of worry through Vivian. "You should be asleep," Vivian said gently. "I couldn't." The girl was turning something over in her hands, a small wooden horse worn smooth from handling. "I keep thinking you're going to be gone when I wake up, like the letter lady said." Vivian sat down across from her. This was the moment she knew to be careful. This was a child who had already had one woman vanish out of her life forever, and Vivian would not be the one to teach her that the second one would too. "Lena," she said, "I'm going to tell you the truth because you seem like a person who'd rather have the truth than a nice-sounding lie. Can you handle the truth?" Lena nodded solemnly. "I don't know if I'm staying," Vivian said. "That's not up to me. It's up to your papa, and it's up to a town full of people who've decided things about me that aren't fair and aren't true. So I can't promise you I'll be here forever. That would be a lie, and I won't lie to you." Lena's face started to fall. "But," Vivian went on, and the girl looked up. "I can promise you this. If I do leave, I won't sneak off in the night like a coward. I'll tell you to your face, and I'll tell you why, and I won't let you wonder. You'll never wake up and find me just gone. You have my word on that, and I don't give my word to many people." Lena studied her with those enormous, serious eyes. Children are the best lie detectors in the world. They haven't yet learned to want to be fooled. "Okay," she said finally. "I believe you. Good. Now go to bed." The girl slid off the chair. She got halfway to the door, then turned around. "Miss Vivian. I hope you get to stay." And then she was gone. Small footsteps fading down the hall, leaving Vivian alone in the warm kitchen with a promise she'd just made that she wasn't at all sure she'd be allowed to keep. She didn't hear Silas in the doorway. She didn't know how long he'd been standing there. "You shouldn't make promises like that," he said quietly. To her. Vivian turned. "You heard that?" "I heard it." He came in, and there was something raw in his face now, something the dark had loosened. "She lost her mother 2 years ago. She doesn't heal like a grown person does. She latches on. She's already latching on to you, and it's been one evening." He shook his head. "If this goes bad, and I'm telling you it's going to go bad, she's the one who pays. Not you, not me, her." "Then don't let it go bad," Vivian said. That's not up to me. You said so yourself. It's up to a town. Some of it's up to you. She stood, and the fire threw its light between them. You can send me away tonight to protect her from getting attached. Fine. She'll cry, she'll get over it. She'll learn that people leave. Or you can let me stay and do the job I came to do, and let her have one thing that's good and warm and hers for as long as it lasts. You're so scared of what happens if it ends that you're ready to end it yourself right now tonight, just to control the ending. She let that land. I've met that kind of scared before. I understand it. But it's still just scared, Mr. Boone. It's not wisdom. It's just fear wearing wisdom's coat. For a long moment he didn't answer. The fire ticked. Somewhere outside a horse shifted and settled. Mary would have liked you, he said at last, so quietly she almost missed it. It was the first time he'd said his wife's name. He seemed surprised he'd said it at all. She had a mouth on her, too. Never let me get away with a damn thing. Then maybe hire the cook, Vivian said softly. Maybe that's what she'd tell you. Silas Boone stood in the ruined-turned-living kitchen, and Vivian watched 2 years of grief and 1 day of chaos war behind his eyes, and she waited because she had learned that the most important things could not be rushed. Morning, he said finally. We'll talk in the morning, but... He stopped at the door, his back to her. Set the bread to rise for 6 loaves, not 3. If you're cooking for this ranch, you're cooking for all of it. It wasn't yes, but it was 6 loaves. Vivian stood alone after he'd gone, and she pressed her flour-dusted hands flat against the table, and she let herself breathe, really breathe, for the first time since Black Ridge. She did not know yet that Dorothea Crane was at that very hour sitting at her own writing desk across town, composing a letter to the church council about the unmarried woman now residing at Boone Ranch. She did not know that by noon the next day, her name would be spoken in 3 shops, 2 homes, and 1 pulpit. She did not know that the war she'd predicted was already being armed while she banked the fire. She only knew that a grieving man had asked for 6 loaves instead of 3, and that a grieving little girl had gone to sleep believing for once that the morning would be kinder than the night. And in the dark kitchen that was not yet hers, but was becoming hers, Vivian Hale rolled up her sleeves again, sank her hands into the dough, and began to build the only thing she'd ever been able to count on. Not a home, not a family, not safety. A meal. Enough for everyone. Whether they'd earned it or not. Because tomorrow, the whole town was going to come for her. And Vivian Hale intended to be standing in a warm kitchen feeding people when it did. The morning came as Vivian had known it would, wearing the face of a man on a horse. She saw him before the men did a rider coming up the north road too fast for a friendly visit, kicking dust the way trouble always does. She was at the stove with 6 loaves cooling, and a skillet full of eggs and salt pork going, and she watched him through the open door, the way a soldier watches the tree line. "Pip," she said, not turning. "Who rides up like that at breakfast?" Pip crowded the window. His face went pale. That's Reverend Cobb's man. That's Elias. He don't come out here. He never comes out here." "He does today." Vivian turned the pork and didn't burn it. That mattered to her. Whatever was coming, the pork was not going to burn on account of it. "Go get Mr. Boone." But Silas was already coming. He'd seen the rider too, and he came around the barn buttoning his coat, and by the time Elias reined up in the yard, Silas was standing in front of his own house with his boots planted and his face gone to stone. Boone. The man on the horse didn't dismount. That was its own kind of insult. Vivian understood a message delivered from the saddle, so the deliverer never had to stand as an equal on your ground. Elias. Silas didn't offer him down. Didn't offer him coffee. Long ride for a Tuesday. Reverend Cobb sends his respects. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, and Vivian felt a cold recognition move through her because she was becoming very tired of folded papers changing her life. "And this." Silas took it. He read it. Vivian watched his jaw work. "The church council," Silas said slowly, "wants to meet with me about my household arrangements. Reverend thought it best to handle it quiet, before it becomes a matter of general talk." It's already general talk, Silas said. Somebody made sure of that before she'd been in my kitchen an hour. Elias's eyes flicked past Silas to the doorway to Vivian standing there in an apron with a skillet in her hand, and whatever he'd been told to expect, it clearly wasn't a woman calmly making breakfast. His expression shifted confusion, then something that tried to be sternness, and didn't quite make it. So it's true, Elias said. She's living here. She's cooking here, Silas said. There's a difference, and you know there's a difference, and every man on this ranch knows it, and the only people who don't seem to know it are sitting in your church deciding they don't want to. Thursday, Elias said, backing his horse. Council meets Thursday. Reverend suggests you come, and he suggests. The man looked at Vivian again. You come alone. He wheeled the horse and was gone before Silas could answer, and the dust he left settled over the yard, and for a moment nobody moved. Then Cutter, the grizzled old hand, spat into the dirt. 3 days, Cutter said. Whole town organized against a plate of eggs in 3 days. That's got to be some kind of record. Nobody laughed. Silas stood staring at the road where Elias had gone, the paper still in his hand, and Vivian watched something harden in him. Not toward her, she realized, but toward them. Breakfast is ready, she said into the silence. Whatever Thursday holds, it holds better on a full stomach. Silas turned and looked at her, and there was a question in his face that he didn't ask out loud, and she answered it anyway. I'm not leaving because a preacher's errand boy told you to make me, she said. If you want me gone, that's your right, it's your ranch. But I don't take my marching orders from men on horses who won't even climb down to give them. Something moved at the corner of Silas Boone's mouth. It wasn't a smile, but it was in the same family as one. Eat, he told his men. All of you. We've got a fence line down on the south pasture and a council of busybodies to worry about, and we're not doing either on empty. By noon, Vivian understood the shape of the war. It came in pieces carried by anyone who rode to town and back. Pip brought the first of it red-faced and stammering from a trip to the general store for nails. They wouldn't sell to me at first, he said. Old Mrs. Pruitt at the store she asked was I from Boone Ranch, and when I said yes, she got this look, and she said, he stopped miserable. Say it, Vivian said. I'd rather know what they're calling me than imagine it. She said the ranch had gone loose, Pip said, staring at his boots. She said a decent town don't sell nails to help a house of sin get built up bigger. Vivian laughed. She couldn't help it. It came out of her sharp and surprised. A house of sin, over a woman making bread. She shook her head. Did she sell you the nails? Cutter went in after me and put money on the counter and stared at her till she did. Then she's not principled, Vivian said. She's just brave when the customer's a nervous boy and a coward when he's a hard old man. Remember that about people, Pip. Most of what they call morals is just who they're afraid of. But the pieces kept coming, and not all of them were as easy to laugh off. A woman named Hetty Voss, who Silas had known his whole life, crossed the street in town, rather than pass a wagon with the Boone brand on it. The Dawson brothers, who'd sold Silas hay for a decade, sent word that they'd reconsidered their price. A boy who used to play with Lena when the Boones came to Sunday service was told by his mother he wasn't to speak to that Boone girl anymore, because who knew what she was learning at home now? That last one was the one that got to Vivian. Not the nails, not the hay. The child. She was cutting vegetables when Lena came in from the yard, and she knew the moment she saw the girl's face that something had cut her. Sit down, Vivian said. Have you eaten since breakfast? Lena climbed onto the stool, and she didn't answer, and her small hands were fists in her lap. I heard Pip and Cutter talking, Lena said. About Tommy Dawson, about how his ma won't let him play with me anymore. She looked up, and her eyes were bright and furious and wet. Because of you. They said it's because of you. The words hit Vivian somewhere she wasn't guarded, and for a second she couldn't speak. Lena, everybody was fine before you came. The girl's voice cracked. Nobody was mad at us before, and now Tommy can't play, and Mrs. Pruitt won't sell to Pip, and Papa has to go to a meeting, and everybody's whispering, and it's because of you and I wish. She stopped. She'd been about to say, I wish you never came, and Vivian could see her get right up to the edge of it, and she could see the exact moment the girl realized she meant it, and was horrified that she meant it, because meaning it made her just like the town. Vivian set down her knife. "You're right," she said. Lena blinked. Of all the things she'd braced for agreement wasn't one of them. "I'm the reason they're whispering," Vivian said. "That part's true. Before I got off that coach, this town had no fight to pick with you. Now it does. You're right about all of it, and you have every reason to be angry, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you you're wrong because you're not." Lena's face crumpled because a child braced for a fight has nowhere to put all that feeling when the fight doesn't come. "But here's the part you don't know yet," Vivian said gently. "I didn't come here to hurt you. I came for a job that somebody promised me and then took away. And the same somebody who took it away is the same somebody who made sure the whole town would whisper. It was arranged, Lena. On purpose. By a grown woman who's very good at making children cry without ever raising her voice. And I think you already know who I mean." Lena went very still. "The letter lady." "The letter lady," Vivian agreed. "She came out here and told you a cook was coming, so that when the cook came, she could point at me and at your papa and make the whole town believe something ugly. You and me, Lena, we're not the ones who did this. We're the ones it was done to." The girl was quiet for a long moment, working through it with the fierce concentration of a child, rearranging her whole understanding of a thing. "That's mean," she said finally. "That's so mean." "It is. Why would she do that? What did we ever do to her?" And there Vivian thought was the exact question. The one she'd been turning over since the letter, since the porch, since Dorothea Crane had spoken Silas's name like she owned it. "I don't know yet," Vivian said honestly. "But I mean to find out, because people that cruel are never cruel for no reason. There's always something they want, and once you know what they want, they stop being scary and start being predictable." She picked up her knife again. "Now, you want to help me, or you want to go on being mad at me, because I could use another pair of hands, and it's hard to chop onions and hold a grudge at the same time." Lena wiped her nose on the back of her hand. She thought about it with great gravity. "I'll help," she decided. "But I'm still a little mad." "That's fair," Vivian said. "Stay a little mad. Just aim it at the right person." Silas came back from the south pasture at dusk to find his daughter standing on a stool at the counter, flour to her elbows, laughing at something, and the sound of it stopped him in the doorway like he'd hit a wall. Vivian saw it happen. She saw the man's whole face change, saw 2 years of a house without a child's laughter in it, and then suddenly the sound of it again, and the way it went into him like something both wonderful and unbearable. He didn't come in. He stood in the doorway and watched, and Vivian pretended not to notice. And Lena noticed everything, always looked up and said, "Papa, I'm making biscuits. Miss Vivian says I got the touch." "Does she?" Silas said. His voice wasn't quite steady. "She says Mama probably had the touch too, and it goes down in families." Vivian froze. She hadn't said that. She hadn't come anywhere near saying that. The child had built it herself out of hope, and now it was hanging in the air between all three of them, and there was no way to take it back. She braced for Silas to flinch, to shut down, to leave. It would have been the natural thing. Instead, the hard man in the doorway swallowed hard and said roughly, "She did. Your mama had the touch. Best biscuits in the territory." He cleared his throat. "So you come by it honest." And Lena beamed like the sun coming up and went back to her flour, and Silas caught Vivian's eye over his daughter's bent head. And there was something in his look that was equal parts, "Thank you," and "How dare you make me feel this?" Later, after Lena was in bed, he found Vivian in the kitchen, the way he seemed to keep finding her there, both of them, the last two, awake. "You're good with her," he said. It sounded like an accusation and a confession at once. "She's easy to be good with. She's smart and she's kind, and she's carrying more grief than any 8-year-old should have to." Vivian wiped down the counter. "She misses her mother. She's just been waiting for permission to say so out loud." "I don't talk about Mary," Silas said. "With her." "I noticed. It's not." He stopped, and Vivian had the sense of a man opening a door he'd kept locked so long the hinges had rusted. When Mary died, Lena stopped talking for a while, weeks. And I thought if I brought up her mother, I'd break her worse. So I just didn't. And then not talking about it got to be the habit. And now I don't know how to start. You just did, Vivian said. Tonight. Best biscuits in the territory. That's how you start. Silas looked at her, and for a moment the guardedness was all the way gone, and he just looked tired and grateful and afraid. Thursday, he said. The council meeting. I've been thinking about it all day. And I keep coming back to the same thing. There's a way to make this whole problem disappear. He said it carefully, like a man setting down something that might break. A way that shuts every mouth in that town and takes their weapon away from them all at once. Vivian went still because she could hear where this was going, and she did not want to go there. Don't, she said. You don't even know what I was going to. I know exactly what you were going to say. She set down the rag. You were going to say the only thing that makes a single woman living on a ranch respectable in a town like this. You were going to say marriage, a practical one, on paper, to take away their scandal by giving them a wedding instead. Silas didn't deny it. That was answer enough. It would solve everything, he said quietly. You'd be safe. Lena would keep you. The town would have nothing left to whisper about. It wouldn't have to be, it would just be an arrangement. Practical. For all our sakes. And there it was, the thing Dorothea Crane had wanted from the very beginning, offered up freely by the very man she'd aimed the trap at. And he didn't even see it. He thought it was his own idea. He thought he'd found the escape hatch. And he didn't understand that the hatch was the trap, that a wedding was exactly the ending the town was already writing for her, and that saying yes wouldn't disarm Dorothea Crane, it would prove her right. No, Vivian said. Silas frowned. Just like that. No, just like that. I'm offering you protection, security, a roof that's yours by right instead of by charity. You'd never have to answer to a town or a preacher or anyone ever again. Most women in your position. I'm not most women, and I'm not in a position, Vivian said. And her voice had gone very level and very cold, the way it did when something mattered too much to raise her voice about. I know you meant it kindly, so I'm going to be kind back, but I'm going to say it once so there's no confusion between us ever again. I did not walk 200 miles to belong to anybody. I didn't come here to be a wife. I didn't come here to be saved. I came here to work. And the day I let a town's opinion scare me into a marriage I don't want is the day I stop being the person I crossed all that country to stay. Silas stared at her. She could see he was genuinely thrown that in his whole life no woman in trouble had ever turned down the offer of a name and a roof. You'd rather face them, he said slowly. Thursday, the council, all of them. Then take an easy way out. There's no easy way out. That's what you're not seeing. Vivian leaned toward him, urgent now. You think marrying me makes it disappear. It doesn't. It proves it. Right now, all they have is a whisper. A single woman lives on Boone Ranch. Ugly, but it's air. It's nothing. But the second you marry a stranger 3 days after she gets off a coach, you hand them a fact. He married the scandal to cover the scandal. They'll say you had to. They'll say why else would a man do that so fast? You won't shut them up, Silas. You'll write their next month of Sundays for them. She watched it land, watched him actually hear it and go cold with the understanding of it. You've thought about this more than I have, he said. I've lived this more than you have. Different town, different reason, same trap. A woman alone is always one scared decision away from being owned by whoever offers the roof. She straightened. I'm not taking the roof. I'm taking Thursday. Let them look me in the eye and call me what they've been calling me from a distance. Let them do it with me standing right there, that they're not ready for. Nobody ever is. For a long moment, Silas Boone was quiet. Then he did a thing that surprised them both. He laughed one short, disbelieving breath of a laugh and shook his head. Elias said come alone, he said. Elias said Vivian, can be disappointed. Word that the cook meant to come to the council meeting herself went through Black Ridge like a fever. It got to Dorothea Crane by Wednesday morning, and Vivian would have given a great deal to see her face when it did. Because the whole design of the trap had depended on Vivian being a thing that was talked about, not a person who talked back. A scandal to be discussed, a problem to be managed, a stain to be scrubbed out by decent people in a quiet room. The one thing the design could not survive was the stain walking in on its own 2 feet and pulling out a chair. By Wednesday afternoon, the pushback started. It came this time in the form of Hetty Voss, the woman who'd crossed the street to avoid a boon wagon riding out to the ranch with 2 other churchwomen in a buckboard, all of them in their good bonnets, all of them wearing the particular expression of women who have come to be reasonable. Vivian met them in the yard. She did not invite them in. She'd learned that lesson too. You never let the people who came to judge you inside the place they came to judge. "We've come," Hetty announced, "as friends." "Have you?" Vivian said. "You crossed a street to avoid this family Monday. That's a strange kind of friend." Hetty's cheeks colored. "We've come to spare you embarrassment. It's not fitting a woman like you standing up in front of the council. It'll only make things worse, for you and for the Boones. Reverend Cobb will hear you out privately, we're sure, if you'll just not make a scene." "A scene," Vivian repeated. "You mean if I'll just be talked about instead of talked to? If I'll just sit out here at the ranch and let a room full of people I've never met decide what kind of woman I am, so long as I don't have the poor manners to be in the room when they do it?" That's exactly it," Vivian said, and her voice was pleasant, which was somehow worse than anger. "You'd like the scandal to have the decency to be quiet. Well, I've been quiet in a lot of towns, Mrs. Voss. It never once helped me. Quiet just means they get to write the story without me in it." She stepped closer to the buckboard. "So here's what I'll do instead. Thursday I'll walk into that meeting and I'll stand up and I'll be as polite and as calm as a Sunday morning. And I'll let every one of you look me in the eye while you decide what I am. And you know what I think will happen." The 3 women waited despite themselves. "I think it's going to be very hard," Vivian said, "to call a woman a devil to her face when she's just standing there tired and honest asking to be allowed to cook. I think some of you are going to have trouble sleeping after. And I think the ones who can do it, the ones who can look me in the eye and damn me anyway, those are the ones this whole town ought to be a little more afraid of than they are of me." She stepped back. "You came out here to talk me out of coming," she said. "You can tell whoever sent you that it didn't take. Now it's a long ride back and I've got bread in the oven. Good afternoon." She turned and walked back to her kitchen, and behind her she heard the buckboard sit in silence for a long moment before it finally slowly turned around. She did not let herself shake until she was inside with the door shut, and her hands were pressed flat against the counter, and only then did she let herself feel how fast her heart was going. Cutter was standing by the stove. He'd heard all of it through the window. "You know that Voss woman's cousin to Dorothea Crane," he said. Vivian went still. "No, I didn't know that. Half this town's cousin to Dorothea Crane, one way or another. That's how she runs it." Cutter picked up a biscuit off the cooling rack and ate it, watching her. "You just sent a message straight up the chain. Crane'll have it by supper. She'll know you're not scared of her." "Good," Vivian said. "Let her know." "She's not gonna like it." "I'm not doing it to be liked." Cutter chewed, considering her. Then he did something he hadn't done once since she'd arrived. He put out his rough old hand. "Cutter," he said. "Properly. Should have done it the first night. I judged you like the rest of 'em when you got off that coach. Figured you for trouble." He shook her hand hard, one pump. "I was wrong. You're the first person I've seen stand up to that woman in 20 years and not blink. Whatever happens Thursday, I'm on your side of the room." It was, Vivian thought, the second coronation Cutter had given her, and it meant more than the first. God. That night, she couldn't sleep, and this time, it wasn't the town keeping her up. It was the question Lena had asked. Why would she do that? What did we ever do to her? Vivian had told the girl she'd find out, and she'd meant it. And a promise to a child was not a thing she took lightly. So while the ranch slept, She did the thing she was best at after cooking, which was watching and listening and putting small pieces together into a shape. She thought about this letter. Somebody had forged Silas's name well enough to fool a Cheyenne newspaper. That took someone who'd seen his handwriting. Someone with standing. Someone who knew the ranch was without a cook, knew he had a grieving daughter, knew exactly which lonely, undefended household to point a scandal at. She thought about Dorothea on the porch. He won't hire you. Silas Boone is many things, but he is not a fool. Said with such certainty. Such personal certainty. The way you speak about someone you've known a long time. The way you speak about someone whose failures you've watched, maybe even wanted. She thought about how a whole town could be turned against a man in 3 days, and how that only worked if the town was primed, if the ground had been salted long before, if Silas Boone had already been made lonely and isolated, and cousin to no one, a widower on the edge of town that people had already half decided to be done with. She was still turning it over when Silas came in the third night, running the two of them the last awake, and she was starting to understand that this kitchen at midnight had become the one place in the world where either of them could say true things. "Can't sleep either," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've been thinking about your Dorothea Crane." Vivian poured him coffee without being asked. She'd learned he took it black and bitter and late. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth even if it's an ugly one. Because I can't fight what I can't see." Silas sat. "Ask. Why does she hate you?" The question landed harder than she'd expected. Silas's hands went tight around the cup. "What makes you think she hates me? You're the one She hates me because I'm useful to hurt you," Vivian said. "I've known that since the porch. The scandal's aimed at me, but it's fired at you. So I'll ask again. Why does a woman go to this much trouble? Forge a letter, drag a stranger 200 miles, turn a whole town to ruin one widower and his little girl? What's between you? Because there's something, Silas. Cruelty this careful is never about a stranger. It's always about a debt." For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down the coffee and looked at his own hands, and when he spoke, his voice had gone somewhere far away. "Dorothea Crane," he said, "had a sister, younger, Nell, and a long time ago, before Mary, before Lena, before any of this, Nell Crane and I were going to be married." Vivian went very still. "Dorothea never wanted it," Silas went on. "I was a nobody with 40 acres and a lot of debt. She had bigger plans for her sister, but Nell didn't care about the plans, and I didn't either, and we were young and stupid and sure of it." He was quiet a moment. "Then Nell got sick, that winter, the bad fever that went through, and she—" He stopped. "She died, 19 years old, and Dorothea." His jaw worked. "Dorothea decided it was my fault. That I'd taken Nell out riding in the cold when she was already weak. That if her sister hadn't been running off to meet a broke rancher's boy, she'd have been home warm alive." He looked up and his eyes were raw. "It's not true. Nell was sick before that ride, but you can't argue a grieving person out of who they need to blame. And Dorothea needed to blame me. Has needed to for going on 20 years. The whole shape of it came clear to Vivian at last, the true shape underneath the whispers and the letters and the council meetings. "She's not fighting a scandal," Vivian said quietly. "She's been fighting you for 20 years. Waiting. And when Mary died and left you alone and vulnerable and half forgotten by the town, she finally saw her opening. You were down. So she moved. And I—" The understanding sat cold in her stomach. "I wasn't just any woman she could point at. I was the replacement. A woman coming to take the place in your house that her sister was supposed to have. That's why she hates me on sight. In her head, I'm Nell's ghost showing up to live the life Nell didn't get to. And she'd rather burn it down than watch that happen." Silas was staring at her. "How did you— I've never told anyone that. Not even Mary knew the whole of it." "Because I told you," Vivian said. "Cruelty's always about a debt. This one's 20 years old, and it's grief that turned into hate, because grief has to go somewhere, and hate at least gives you something to do." She sat down across from him, urgent now, everything clicking into place. But Silas, this changes everything about Thursday. Don't you see, I've been getting ready to defend myself. To prove I'm decent, prove I'm just a cook, prove I don't deserve what they're saying. And that's a fight I can't win, because it was never about me. But this, I can win. How? Because a woman who accuses her enemy out of grief can be forgiven by a town, Vivian said. But a woman who forged a letter, dragged a stranger across 200 miles, and manufactured a scandal to settle a 20-year-old private grudge, dressing up her own vengeance as the town's morality, that woman the town cannot forgive. Because that woman made fools of every one of them. She used their decency as her weapon. And nobody likes finding out they've been used. Silas Boone looked at her like the ground had shifted under him. "You mean to stand up Thursday," he said slowly, "and not defend yourself at all? You mean to put her on trial?" "I mean to walk in as the accused," Vivian said, "and walk out with the whole room understanding they were never judging a scandal. They were doing a grieving woman's revenge for her and calling it church." She leaned back. "I just need one thing to make it land. One piece of proof. Something that ties that letter to her hand, and not just to a story I'm telling." And in the dark kitchen, Silas Boone was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and crossed to a shelf and took down an old tin box that Vivian hadn't paid any mind to, coated in the dust of years. "Nell used to write me letters," he said. "I never could throw them out. Mary knew, and she let me keep them because she was a better person than I deserved." He set the box on the table. And every one of those letters, Vivian, every single one, was copied out clean for Nell by her big sister, because Nell's own hand was poor, and Dorothea was proud of her fine penmanship. He opened the lid. "Dorothea Crane's handwriting is in this box. 20 years of it." Vivian's breath caught. Because she had the forged letter, the one that had brought her to Black Ridge, signed in a stranger's careful hand. It was folded in her bag 10 feet away. And now spread before her, in a dusty tin box, she had 20 years of the hand that might have written it. She reached for the box, and her fingers were not quite steady. And outside, the wind was picking up against the walls of a house that a whole town had decided to condemn. "Get me a lamp," Vivian said very quietly. "And don't wake Lena." And Silas Boone got the lamp. They worked until the lamp burned low, and by the time the oil ran thin, Vivian knew. She'd laid the forged letter beside 3 of Nell's old ones, and at first the match had seemed too easy, too clean, and she'd made herself doubt it. She'd learned long ago that the things you wanted to be true were the things you had to check twice. So she checked. The capital B in Boone. The particular way the writer crossed a T with a downward hook like a small hatchet. The comma that always sat too high, floating above the line instead of resting on it. "It's the same hand," she said finally. "Silas, it's the same hand. She didn't just arrange this. She sat down at a desk and wrote it herself." Silas stared at the letters spread out under the dying light, 20 years apart, and unmistakably twins, and something moved across his face that she couldn't name at first. Then she understood it. It was grief arriving fresh. Because a part of him, she realized, had wanted to be wrong. Had wanted Dorothea Crane to be merely bitter, merely cold. Not this. Not a woman who'd sit at a writing desk and forge a dead man's future to settle a debt with a corpse. 20 years, he said quietly. "She's carried it 20 years, and I never knew how deep. I thought she just disliked me. I never thought she was building something. People like her always are." Vivian began gathering the letters, careful, as though they were made of glass. Grief that doesn't heal doesn't just sit still. It works. It plans. It waits for a bad winter. She squared the papers and looked at him. But she made one mistake. She wrote it down. And people who are used to being believed always make that mistake eventually, because it never once occurs to them that anyone will check. Silas reached out and put his hand flat over the letters before she could tuck them away. "If you take these into that meeting," he said, "you're not just clearing your name. You're calling the most powerful woman in this territory a forger and a liar in front of the whole town she owns. She won't survive that quietly. She'll come back at you with everything she has. I know. You could still walk away from this, Both of us could. Sell up, move west, start clean somewhere she's never heard of. Vivian looked at him a long moment. Is that what you want? No, he admitted. But I'd do it, to keep Lena out of the fire. Lena's already in the fire, Vivian said gently. She's 8, and her friends have been pulled away from her, and she's learned this week that grown women will hurt a child to win a fight with a man. Running doesn't get her out of the fire, Silas. It just teaches her the fire wins. She closed her hand over the letters. The only thing that gets her out is watching somebody stand in it and not burn. Thursday came the way a thing you can't stop always comes too fast and then all at once. Vivian dressed plain and clean. She did not try to look respectable because looking respectable was a game she couldn't win against people who'd already decided she wasn't, and trying only made you look like you were hiding something. She looked instead exactly like what she was, a working woman with flour that never quite washed all the way out from under her nails, tired around the eyes, steady in the hands. Silas hitched the wagon. He came out in his one good coat, the black one, and Vivian understood without being told that it was the coat he'd buried Mary in, and married Mary in both the only formal thing a rancher owned, brought out for weddings and funerals, and now this. You don't have to come in with me, she said. I'm coming in. Elias said, I don't care what Elias said. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. You stood in my yard 3 days ago and told me you don't take orders from men on horses. Neither, it turns out, do I. And that was the moment. Not any of the grand ones that came later, but that one small and quiet. The two of them on a wagon bench, heading toward the worst thing either of them had faced. That Vivian felt something shift in her chest that she had spent her whole careful life refusing to feel. She pushed it down. There was work to do. Feelings could wait until the work was done the way they always had. But Lena, standing in the doorway with Cutter's hand on her small shoulder, called out across the yard as the wagon rolled. Miss Vivian, you said you'd tell me to my face if you left, so you have to come back and tell me you didn't. That's the rule. That's the rule, Vivian called back. I'll be back to tell you. And they rode into town. The meeting was in the church, which Vivian thought was fitting, because Dorothea Crane had always meant to make this look like the work of God, rather than the work of Dorothea Crane. The room was full. That, too, Vivian understood. This was meant to be quiet, private, a matter handled before it became general talk. But the town had smelled blood and quiet. Private matters have a way of filling up with spectators when everybody wants to be able to say they were there. Every pew was packed. Mrs. Pruitt from the general store, the Dawson brothers, Hetty Voss and her 2 churchwomen sitting stiff. And at the front behind a plain table, 3 men of the council with Reverend Cobb in the middle, and standing just to the side, not seated with the accusers, and not seated with the accused, perfectly positioned, to seem like a mere concerned citizen Dorothea Crane. She dressed for it. Of course she had. She looked like righteousness itself. Her eyes found Vivian in the doorway, and then found Silas beside her. And something flickered in her face. Surprise quickly hidden that Vivian had actually come, that Silas had come with her. The design had not accounted for this. Vivian filed that away. She's already off her plan. Keep her there. Miss Hale. Reverend Cobb rose. He was not, Vivian thought, an unkind man, just a weak one, the kind who let the strongest voice in the room become his conscience. This is, we did suggest, you might not wish to attend. These matters are delicate. We only meant to spare you. You meant to spare yourselves, Vivian said, and her voice carried clear and even to the back of the packed church. The discomfort of judging a person to her face. I understand. It's easier to talk about someone than to someone. But I'd rather be here. If I'm going to be tried, I'd like to at least attend my own trial. A murmur went through the pews. Dorothea's mouth tightened. This is not a trial, Reverend Cobb said, flustered. This is a discussion of a moral concern that has troubled the community, regarding your residence. At Boone Ranch, a single woman living in a room off the kitchen, cooking 3 meals a day for 11 men, and a little girl who lost her mother, Vivian said. For a fair wage, in service, as a cook. If that's a moral concern, then every hotel and boarding house and army fort in this territory is a den of sin because they all employ women to cook for men they aren't married to. But I don't think you called this meeting about hotels. Someone in the back of the church laughed quickly, stifled, but it happened, and Dorothea's head turned sharply toward the sound. The concern, Dorothea said, stepping forward smoothly, taking the reins because Cobb was losing them, is not the cooking, Miss Hale. It is the impropriety. A young woman unmarried, no family to vouch for her, no husband, no history. We can verify arriving from nowhere to live under the roof of a widowed man. You may dress it in aprons all you like. Decent people know what it looks like. And we have children in this town whose innocence we are charged to protect. It was a good speech. Vivian could admit that. It was the speech that had probably worked on this town 100 times over 20 years. It hit every note: propriety, family, the children always the children, and Vivian watched the pews respond to it, watched heads nod, watched the room begin to firm up against her. And then she took it all apart. You're right, Vivian said. A woman arrived from nowhere with no family to vouch for her, and no history you could verify to live under the roof of a widowed man. That does sound bad. I'd have wondered about her too. She paused. There's just one thing that puzzles me, Mrs. Crane. How did she get here? Dorothea's eyes narrowed. I'm sure I don't. How did I get here? Vivian said. That's the question nobody's asked. I'm 200 miles from home in a town I'd never heard of a week ago. Women like me don't just appear at a stranger's ranch. Somebody has to bring us. So how did I come to be at Boone Ranch's door, Mrs. Crane? Because I'll tell you how, and I've got it in writing. She reached into her bag. The room went very still. Silas beside her had gone still too. But it was a different stillness, the stillness of a man watching something he trusts move into position. I came, Vivian said, drawing out the folded letter, because of this. An advertisement answered by mail. Cook wanted Boone Ranch, Black Ridge. And then a reply telling me the job was mine, telling me to come signed. She held it up, with Silas Boone's name. Then take it up with Mr. Boone, Dorothea said crisply. If he wrote you a letter and then denied you the position, that is a matter between the two of. He didn't write it, Vivian said. That's the thing. He never posted for a cook. He never sent this reply. Somebody wrote it in his name. Somebody forged his hand well enough to fool a Cheyenne newspaper and a woman 200 miles away. Somebody wanted me here standing exactly where I'm standing so this town would have a scandal to point at. She let it settle. Now who in all of Black Ridge would want a thing like that? The room had gone from murmur to breathless. Reverend Cobb was looking between the women uncertain, and Dorothea Crane. Vivian watched it happen. Dorothea Crane made her second mistake. She smiled. Small, cold, certain. The smile of someone who thinks the trap has closed on the wrong person. A forged letter, Dorothea said with delicate contempt. How convenient. A piece of paper you produce yourself that you say proves a conspiracy against you. Anyone could write such a thing. Why, you could have written it yourself, Miss Hale, to play the victim and win exactly this sympathy. A clever woman with no history and no family forgery would be nothing to her. She turned to the pews, spreading the doubt like seed. Do you see how they operate, caught out, and immediately she's the one who's been wronged? It's always the way with this sort. It was Vivian had to admit a beautiful counter. It turned her own evidence into proof against her. Half the room bought it, she could see them buy it, see the sympathy she'd been building curdle back into suspicion. In one move, Dorothea had taken the letter and made it a weapon in her own hand, which was exactly what Vivian had needed her to do. You're right again, Vivian said. Anyone could have written it. A piece of paper on its own proves nothing. So let's not take my word for whose hand it is. She reached into her bag a second time. Let's compare it to a hand we know. She drew out the old letters. Nell's letters. 20 years of them tied with string brittle at the folds. And she watched the color leave Dorothea Crane's face. These, Vivian said, holding them up beside the forgery, are letters written nearly 20 years ago. Letters a young woman named Nell sent to a young man she meant to marry, copied out clean, every one by her older sister, because Nell's own hand was poor and her sister was proud of her fine penmanship. "Isn't that right, Mrs. Crane? You wrote your sister's love letters for her. Silas Boone kept every one." She turned to the council table and set the letters down before Reverend Cobb. "Look at the capital B. Look at how the T is crossed that little downward hook. Look at where the commas sit too high, always too high, floating above the line. And then look at the letter that brought me here. It's the same hand, Reverend. It's the same hand in all of them. The woman who forged Silas Boone's name to bring a stranger to his door is the same woman standing in front of you right now, telling you it was all about protecting your children." The church erupted, not into shouting, into something worse for Dorothea, something she couldn't command or silence. Into the low rolling sound of a whole room turning at once, of neighbor leaning to neighbor, of a spell breaking. Reverend Cobb bent over the letters. One of the other councilmen leaned in. Vivian watched the man's finger move from the old B to the new one, back and forth, and she watched his face change. "That's," the councilman said. "Reverend, that's the same look at the—" "It's a trick," Dorothea said, and for the first time her voice had lost its silk. "It's forgery upon forgery. She's a stranger. She'd say anything. She reached for the letters. Give those to me. Those are private. Those are my dead sister's. She has no right." "Then they're yours," Vivian said quietly, and did not let go of them. "You've just told a room full of witnesses. These are your sister's letters. Your sister whose hand was poor. Your sister whose letters you wrote out yourself." "Thank you, Mrs. Crane. I was hoping you'd claim them. Because a stranger with no history couldn't possibly have known whose these were, but you knew on sight. You knew before you read a word." Dorothea Crane's hand froze halfway to the letters. She understood then that she'd walked into it. Vivian saw the exact moment of understanding cross her face, the way a person looks when the floor they've stood on their whole life turns out to be ice, and they hear it crack. But Dorothea Crane had not run a town for 20 years by falling the first time she was pushed. She drew herself up. And when she spoke again, it was not to the council, it was to the pews, to the town, to the audience she'd cultivated her whole life. And she reached for the only card left that could beat the truth. She reached for grief. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I wrote it. Are you satisfied?" Her voice cracked, and Vivian couldn't tell how much of the crack was real and how much was performance, and she suspected Dorothea couldn't either anymore after 20 years. "I wrote it because I have watched that man." She flung out a hand at Silas. "Live and prosper and raise a child for 20 years while my sister lies in the ground. My Nell, 19 years old. He took her out into the cold when she was sick, and he brought her home to die, and then he married another woman and had a daughter, and went on with his life as though Nell had never existed, as though she were nothing, as though she could be replaced. Tears now, real ones, terrible ones. And when I saw he was alone again, when I saw this stranger coming to take the place my sister was meant to have, I could not bear it. I could not bear to watch him be happy again. Is that so monstrous? To love a sister that much? To want the man who killed her to feel 1 hour of what he took from me? It was Vivian understood the most dangerous thing Dorothea could have done. Because it was true. The grief was true, even buried inside the lie. And truth has a pull that no forged letter can match. She felt the room tilt again. She heard a woman in the pews start to cry. She saw sympathy, actual sympathy, move across faces that a moment ago had been turning against Dorothea. A grieving sister. 20 years of loss. Who among them hadn't buried someone who couldn't understand? Silas made a sound beside her, low and wounded. "Dorothea, Nell was sick before that ride. The doctor said, the doctor said—" "Don't you speak her name," Dorothea hissed. And there it was, the moment balanced on a knife. Vivian could feel it. In the next breath, this room would either forgive Dorothea Crane her whole cruel campaign on account of an old grief, and turn its pity on her, and quietly go back to wondering about the stranger in the widower's kitchen, or it wouldn't. And which way it broke depended entirely on what Vivian said next. She could attack. She could press the advantage hammer, the forgery call Dorothea a liar again. And she knew with the certainty that had kept her alive in a dozen hard towns that if she did, she'd lose. You cannot beat grief with an accusation. Attack a crying woman, and the room's sympathy hardens around her like a shell. So Vivian did the last thing anyone in that church expected. She set down the letters, and she spoke not to the room but to Dorothea gently, the way you speak to someone who's bleeding. "I'm sorry about your sister," Vivian said. The church went silent. "I mean that. I'm sorry Nell died at 19. I'm sorry you've carried it 20 years. I'm sorry that grief that big had nowhere to go, so it went into hating a man because hating him at least gave you something to do with your hands." Her voice was soft, and it carried anyway. "I've buried people too, Mrs. Crane. I know what it does. I know how you'll do anything to make the loss mean something, and how the cruelest thing about grief is that it makes you cruel and calls it love." Dorothea stared at her, thrown completely off her footing. She'd braced for attack. She had no defense ready for tenderness. "But here's the thing I need you to hear," Vivian went on, "and I need this whole room to hear it too, because it's the true thing under all of this. Nell can't be replaced." "You're right. She never can. Nobody is trying to. I'm not your sister's ghost. I'm not here to take a life she should have had. I'm a cook, Mrs. Crane. I make bread. I'm nobody's replacement for anybody because people aren't positions that get filled. And the terrible thing you've done, the thing I don't think you can take back, is you tried to fix a grief about love by manufacturing a lie about sin. You took your real pain over Nell, and you dressed it up as concern for these people's children, and you used every decent person in this room as your weapon. You made them think they were protecting their town. They were just carrying your grudge for you and calling it church." She turned to the pews now, to the whole room, and her voice never rose, and that was what made it land. "That's what I need you to see. Not that she's cruel grief makes anyone cruel, but that she used you. Every whisper you passed along every wagon you crossed the street, to avoid every child you told to stop playing with a little girl who lost her mother. You thought you were being good. You were doing one woman's 20-year-old revenge for her, and she let you believe it was your own idea. That's the part I don't think a decent town forgives. Not the grief, the using." The silence that followed was different from all the silences before it. It was the silence of people looking down at their own hands and not liking what they'd done with them. Mrs. Pruitt from the general store spoke first, and her voice was small. "She told me the girl was learning wickedness at the ranch. I told my sister not to let her boy near the child." She looked at Silas, stricken. "I'm sorry, Silas. I've known you since you were a boy. I don't know why she said it so certain." "She says everything's certain." Cutter's voice came from the back he'd followed them in, Vivian realized, and half the ranch with him. "That's the trick of her. 20 years of certain. And every one of you let it stand, because it was easier than crossing her." Hetty Voss was crying openly now, and it was not the pretty crying of before. "I crossed the street," she whispered. "From a little girl. God forgive me, I crossed the street from a child." And Dorothea Crane stood at the front of the church she had ruled for 2 decades and watched her power drain out of the room like water out of cracked hands. Not because Vivian had beaten her, but because Vivian had refused to beat her and had instead simply held up a mirror and let the town see itself. "You've turned them against me," Dorothea said, and her voice had gone thin and shaking, and for the first time she sounded not powerful and not even grieving, but simply old. "In one morning. 20 years and you in one morning. I didn't turn them against you," Vivian said. "I just stopped letting you point them at me. What they do with themselves now, that was always up to them. It always was. That's the part you never understood, Mrs. Crane. You didn't have power over this town. They just kept handing it to you because nobody ever made them look at what they were holding." Tig. It should have been the end. Vivian thought for one clean breath that it was the end. Reverend Cobb rose ashen and cleared his throat and began to say the words that would close it, that the council found no cause against Miss Hale, that the matter was a private grief wrongly made public, that the town owed the Boone family, and he never finished. because the church door banged open, and Pip stood there chest-heaving, having ridden from the ranch so hard, his horse was still screaming outside, and his face was the color of ash. "Mr. Boone," he gasped. "You gotta come! It's Lena!" Silas was up and moving before the boy finished, and Vivian with him, and the whole church rising in a wave behind them. "She went after you," Pip choked out. "She heard folks in town say the meeting turned bad. Somebody rode past and yelled. It said they were run out, and she thought you and Miss Vivian got hurt or arrested, or she took the pony to come find you, and the storm come up fast off the ridge, and she went the wrong way. She went up toward the high pasture and cut her. I couldn't find her. I looked, the snow come down so fast I couldn't." The word storm hit the room, and every rancher in it went cold, because they knew what the others didn't. That a spring storm off the high ridge was the kind of thing that killed grown men who knew the country, and that an 8-year-old girl on a pony alone in the wrong direction had hours at the very most. Silas had gone white as death. "How long?" he said. "Pip, how long ago?" "I don't an hour. More, I rode straight here, And Vivian watched Silas Boone, who had faced a whole town without flinching that morning, come apart in a single instant, watched the man's knees nearly go. Watched every bit of the steadiness leave him, because a town he could stand against. But this was his child alone in the killing cold gone, because she'd been afraid for him. He grabbed Vivian's arm, and his grip was crushing, and his voice was barely a voice at all. "She went looking for us," he said. "She went out in that because she thought we needed her. Vivian, she's 8. And Vivian Hale, who had come to this town, a stranger a week ago, who had just won the fight of her life, and had no time at all to feel. It took Silas Boone's face in both her flower-scarred hands and made him look at her. "Then we go get her," she said. "Right now. And I need you to stop shaking and start thinking, because Lena doesn't need you afraid. She needs you smart. You know this country. You know where a scared child on a pony goes when the snow comes. So you're going to tell me, and then we're going to bring your daughter home." Outside, the wind was already rising toward a scream, and the light was going the wrong kind of dark. And somewhere up on the high ridge, a little girl who'd broken the rule and gone without telling anyone to her face was riding straight into the worst night the mountain had. The town that had come to condemn her became in the space of one breath an army she commanded. Vivian turned from Silas to the church full of people, the same people who'd sat in judgment 10 minutes before, and she did not ask them for anything. She told them because there was no time left for asking, and because a woman who has just proven she'll speak the truth to a room's face has already earned the right to be obeyed by it. "You." She pointed at the Dawson brothers, who knew horses better than anyone in the territory. "How many riders can you put on the North Road inside 10 minutes? 6, the elder Dawson said, already standing. 8 if we take the boys. Take the boys. Ropes, lanterns, blankets, and every coat in this building, strip them off. I don't care whose. Sunday best it is, a coat's a coat when a child's freezing." She turned. "Mrs. Pruitt, your store's got the hot stove, and it's closest to the North Road. Open it. Get water boiling. Get every blanket off your shelves, and when we bring that girl down, she goes there first, not all the way out to the ranch. Understand?" Yes. The storekeeper, who'd refused to sell nails a week ago, was already fumbling for her keys. "Hetty Voss." The crying woman looked up. "You wanted to do something for that child besides cross a street. Here's your chance. Go with Pruitt. Get that store warm." And Hetty Voss, who had been useless with guilt a minute earlier, found something to do with her hands and went. Silas caught her arm. "Vivian, the high pasture, if she went up there, there's 100 draws she could have turned into. We could ride right past her in the dark and never. Then we don't ride blind." Vivian rounded on him, and she needed him steady, so she made herself into the steadiest thing in the room. "Think. You said it yourself, you know this country. A scared child on a scared pony, snow coming down, no landmarks. She's not going to keep climbing into open country, Silas. Cold and frightened, an animal goes where it feels sheltered. Where's the nearest shelter between here and the high pasture? Not the safest, the nearest. The first place a pony would smell out of the wind." Silas's eyes changed. The panic cleared just enough, and the rancher underneath it came back. "The line shack," he said. "Old McCallum place. Half fallen, but it's got 3 walls and it's downwind of the ridge trail. If the pony had any sense at all, it'd drift there before it'd climb." "Then that's where we start." She was already moving toward the door. "Cutter, you and Silas take the ridge trail straight to the shack. Dawson's, split your riders, sweep the draws below it in case she came off the pony. Pip." "I'm coming. I have to come. It's my fault. I should have watched her." "It's not your fault, and you're coming, but you're coming to the store to keep that fire going, and mind it doesn't burn the town down, because you're shaking too hard to be any use on a horse, and you know it." She gripped his shoulder hard and gentled her voice for just 1 second. "You rode straight here through that storm to get her father Pip. You already did the brave thing. Let the rest of us do ours." The boy's face crumpled with relief and shame both, and he nodded. Silas was staring at her, at this woman directing his neighbors and his ranch hands and half the town, like she'd been born to it in the same church where an hour ago she'd been the accused. "How do you?" he started. "Kitchens," Vivian said, already pulling a borrowed coat over her shoulders. "You run a kitchen at supper for 40 hungry men, and you learn how to move people fast when everything's on fire. Now stop looking at me and get on your horse. Every second we spend admiring each other is a second she's out there alone." They rode into the storm, and the storm did everything it could to stop them. Vivian rode behind Silas on the ridge trail, her arms locked around his waist, because she was no horsewoman, and this was no weather to learn in, and the cold came at them like a living thing with teeth. And inside 20 minutes, she understood in her body what the ranchers had known in their bones the moment Pip said the word storm. This was killing weather. A grown man could die in it. She stopped letting herself imagine what it was doing to a child, and put every bit of that fear into her eyes, instead searching the white, nothing for anything that wasn't white. "Lena!" Silas roared it into the wind over and over, and the wind ate it. "Lena!" Nothing. The trail climbed. Cutter rode a length ahead, a lantern swinging from his saddle, its light swallowed after 10 feet. "The shack!" Vivian shouted against Silas's back. "How much farther?" "Close, if it's still standing." And then lower so she almost lost it in the wind. "Vivian, if she came off the pony back down one of those draws, if she's lying out in this, then the Dawsons find her and they've got blankets and fire waiting. Don't do that. Don't bury her before we've looked. You keep your mind on the shack." But her own heart was hammering because an hour was a long time, and the cold was so total, and Lena was so small. They came on the shack the way you come on things in a whiteout, not gradually, but all at once, its dark bulk lunging up out of the snow. And Vivian's heart seized because there, humped against the leeward wall with its head down and its flanks caked white, stood a pony. "The pony!" she screamed. "Silas, the pony's here!" He was off his horse before it fully stopped floundering through the drifts to the sagging door, and Vivian came off after him, and went down hard in snow to her thighs, and clawed up and followed. Cutter's lantern swung wild behind them. Silas hit the door with his shoulder, and it gave, and he was through it, and Vivian heard the sound that came out of him, a sound she would never forget, as long as she lived, the sound of a man's whole soul falling off a cliff. Because the shack was empty. The pony was here. The child was not. "No," Silas said. "No, no." He spun in the tiny space as if she might be hiding, as if the emptiness might be a trick. She was on it. She had to be on it. She came off. Vivian was already crouching, running her hands over the dirt floor by the door where the snow had blown in, and there, faint, half-filled already, but there the small, shapeless prints of a child's boots. "No, no, look. She got here. She made it here, Silas. She got off the pony and she came inside." The prince turned, led back out the door. Vivian's stomach dropped. And then she went back out. "Why would she—" Silas's voice broke. "Why would she leave shelter? Why would she go back into that?" And Vivian knew. She knew the way she'd known everything about that child from the first night in the kitchen. She stood up slowly, and the knowing was the coldest thing the storm had done to her yet. "Because she came looking for us," Vivian said. "She thinks we're hurt, arrested. She came out in this to save her father." She wouldn't stay in a warm shack, Silas, not while she thinks you're out here somewhere freezing. She'd rest the pony a minute, and then she'd go back out to keep looking. She's not lost. Vivian's throat closed. She's searching. For us. That's the kind of child you raised. She's out there hunting for you in a blizzard because she loves you more than she's afraid of dying. Silas made that sound again worse this time. And for one terrible second, Vivian thought he would break entirely, and she could not let that happen because a broken man could not save a child. Which way? She grabbed his coat with both fists. The tracks lead out. Which way do they point? Which way would she have gone thinking she'd find us, Silas? You know where she thinks you'd be. She came from town. She'd head back toward the road. She thinks you're on which way? The road, he gasped. Back toward the town road. She'd cut across the flat to reach it. But the flat, Vivian, in this, there's nothing to hold, to no fence, no tree. A person walks in circles out there, in a whiteout. Grown men have died 50 yards from their own door on the flat. Then we don't walk it, we rope it. Cutter had come to the door, and Vivian turned on him. Every rope we brought, every rope. We tie onto each other and to the shack, and we sweep the flat in a line so nobody gets lost, and we cover every yard between here and that road. How many ropes? 4 good ones on us. The Dawsons'll have more when they... A shout out in the white. Then a lantern bobbing. The Dawson boys, 3 of them having followed the ridge trail up when the draws turned up nothing, and Vivian could have wept because 4 had just become 7, and 7 roped together could sweep a lot of flat. Anybody find sign below? Cutter shouted. Nothing. No child, no tracks, the snow left standing. She's ahead of us, not below, Vivian called. On the flat, heading for the town road looking for her father. We rope up and we sweep it. Now. Now. And the men who an hour ago had sat in a church pew, wondering whether she was a sinner, tied themselves to her rope without a word of argument, and walked out into the killing dark on her command. They swept the flat for what felt like a year, and was probably an hour 7 of them strung out along the ropes an arm's length apart at the fullest. They dared close enough to see the next lantern through the snow screaming Lena's name into a wind that gave nothing back. The cold stopped being pain and became something worse, a heaviness, a wanting to stop. And Vivian understood how men died on this flat, how the snow talked you into resting. And she bit her own cheek bloody to keep her mind sharp and kept moving. Lena, her voice was going. Lena, it's Vivian. It's Vivian, and your papa. We're not hurt. We're here. Lena. That was the thing she realized even as she screamed it. That was the thing to scream. Not just the girl's name. The reassurance. Because Lena wasn't lost and waiting to be found. Lena was searching and terrified and looking for proof her father was alive, and if she heard, "We're not hurt, we're here," she might stop running and answer. "Say it!" she screamed down the rope line. "Tell her you're alive. She's looking for her father. Silas, let her hear your voice." And Silas Boone threw back his head and put everything he had left into it. "Lena, it's Papa. I'm not hurt. Baby. Papa's not hurt. I'm right here. Follow my voice. Lena." They screamed it in turns, all 7 of them, so the child would hear a wall of living voices instead of one. And they swept, and the storm screamed back, and Vivian's legs had stopped feeling like her own, and the black thought crept in at the edge of her mind that they were too late. That an hour and more in this had already done what it did, that they were sweeping for a body. And then, Cutter's voice cracked across the line, no longer calling the girl's name, but something else entirely. Hold the line. I heard everybody shut up and hold. The line stopped. The men went silent. Even the wind seemed to draw a breath. And into that half-second of held silence came a sound so small it was barely a sound at all. Thin high, torn to rags by the wind, but real, unmistakably a child. Papa. Silas made a sound that wasn't a word. That way. Cutter had his arm out, pointing into the dark off the end of the line. Off the left it came from the left. Silas hit the end of his rope so hard, he nearly pulled the man next to him off his feet, and Vivian was already fumbling at the knot at her own waist, because the rope only reached so far, and the voice had come from past it. "Don't you dare untie!" Cutter roared. "You untie in this, you're dead. We lose you both." "Then give me slack, give me slack." Vivian got free and grabbed the tail of the rope and wrapped it twice around her forearm and plunged off the line toward where the voice had come, feeding out rope behind her, and Silas was beside her doing the same, the two of them wading into the white, with the lifeline paying out, screaming the girl's name. "Lena, keep talking, keep making noise, baby. We're coming. Keep talking so we can find you." "Papa." The voice was closer, weaker. "Papa, I can't stand up." "You don't have to stand up, just keep talking, count for me." "Lena, count out loud, loud as you can. Count out." And out of the storm, thin and shaking, came a little girl's voice counting 1, 2, 3. And it was the bravest and most terrible thing Vivian had ever heard. A freezing child counting into the dark on faith that the voices coming for her were real, and they followed that counting like it was a rope of its own. And then Silas gave a cry and lunged and went down on his knees in the snow and came up with a small snow-caked, half-frozen shape clutched against his chest. "I've got her! I've got her! Vivian!" His voice shattered completely. "She's so cold! She's so cold, she's not—" "Lena, baby, Papa's here. Papa's got you. Open your eyes for me." The girl's eyes fluttered. Her lips were blue, but she was alive. She was breathing, and when she saw her father's face, she made a sound that broke every heart within earshot. "You're not hurt," Lana whispered. "I looked and looked. I thought they hurt you. In the meeting. I had to find you." Her eyes rolled toward Vivian. "I didn't break the rule. I didn't sneak. I told Cutter I was going. I told him to my face." "You did," Vivian said, and her own voice broke now finally after holding through everything it broke over a half-frozen child in the snow. "You followed the rule perfect. You told somebody. You did everything right. Now you hold on to your papa, and you let us do the rest." "Follow the rope back," Cutter was bellowing from the line. "Hand over hand. Don't lose the rope. We got the store warm and waiting. Move. Boone, move before she freezes in your arms." And they followed the rope back, hand over hand, Silas cradling his daughter inside his coat against his own body heat. Vivian's hands on his back guiding him when the cold made him stagger 7 men and 1 woman, and 1 saved child hauling themselves out of the killing dark, along a line of rope back toward the light. They didn't make it to the ranch. They made it to Pruitt's store where the stove was roaring and the blankets were hot, and Hetty Voss had water at a boil, and they got the frozen child out of her wet things, and wrapped and warmed by degrees, the way Vivian barked out the doing of it. Not too fast, not right against the stove, warm the blankets and change them out. Warm water, not hot. Get some in her when she can swallow, and slowly. Slowly, the blue left Lena's lips, and the color came back into her small face, and she stopped shivering, the deep, frightening way, and started shivering the good, ordinary way that meant her body was fighting back. And the whole town packed into that store, and the street outside it holding its breath. The same town. Watching the woman they'd tried to run out of Black Ridge that very morning, save the life of a child with her hands and her voice, and her refusal to let anyone panic. When Lena finally slept, really slept safe and warm against her father's chest, out of danger. Silas looked up from his daughter's face and found Vivian across the crowded store, and the look he gave her was not a thing that could be said out loud in a room full of people. But he tried anyway. His voice was wrecked. "You found her. You knew she went back out looking. You knew where. You roped the flat. You—" He stopped because his throat wouldn't work. "I'd have ridden right past that shack and up into the high country, and she'd have died 100 yards behind me while I searched the wrong ground. You saved her. You saved my—" "We saved her," Vivian said. "All of us. That's what a town's for when it remembers." But it wasn't the town Silas was looking at. And it wasn't the town that had known from a set of half-filled boot prints on a dirt floor exactly what kind of love had sent an 8-year-old girl back out into a blizzard. It wasn't the town that had understood that child's heart on sight, because it was made of the same stubborn, self-sacrificing stuff. Dorothea Crane stood in the doorway of the store. Nobody had seen her come. She'd followed somewhere in all of it, whether to gloat or to grieve, or because even she could not stay away when a child was dying. No one would ever know. She stood in the doorway, looking at the sleeping girl at the color. Come back into that small face at the woman who'd saved her. And something was happening in Dorothea Crane's face that no one in Black Ridge had seen there in 20 years. The whole store went silent and wary. Cutter half rose, but Dorothea didn't advance. She looked at Lena, alive, breathing safe. And she looked at Vivian. And when she spoke, her voice had none of its silk left, none of its certainty. It was just an old woman's voice cracked down the middle. Nell would have gone back out too, Dorothea said. For someone she loved, she'd have gone right back out into it. A tear cut down her hard face. That's how she was. That's exactly how she was. And she looked at Vivian with 20 years of grief, finally meeting something it couldn't lie its way around the plain sight of a child who'd nearly died of love saved by a woman Dorothea had tried to destroy. I have done a terrible thing, Dorothea Crane whispered to the whole silent room. I have spent 20 years doing terrible things and calling them love. And I watched that child go back into the storm for her father tonight, and Her voice failed. She pressed a hand to her mouth. God forgive me. I nearly did to another family what was done to mine. I nearly made another little girl grow up without... She couldn't finish. She turned as if to flee. Mrs. Crane, Vivian's voice stopped her at the door. The whole town watched. And Vivian, who had every right to let the woman walk out into the dark alone with her ruin, who had beaten her that morning, and could have crushed her now, did the thing that was hardest and truest and would be remembered in Black Ridge for as long as any of them lived. It's warm in here, Vivian said quietly. And it's a bad night out. There's coffee on the stove. You can stay till the storm passes, same as everyone. Dorothea Crane turned back. She looked at the woman she'd tried to destroy, offering her a place by the fire, and whatever was left of the hard shell she'd built over 20 years of grief simply broke, and she wept. Not the weaponized weeping of the church that morning, but the real thing. The thing she'd never let herself do, standing in a crowded store while a whole town watched a monster turn back into a grieving sister. And Silas Boone held his sleeping daughter and watched the stranger who'd gotten off a coach a week before hand mercy to the woman who'd tried to ruin them, and felt the last of something he'd been holding shut for 2 years come quietly finally open. The storm blew itself out before dawn, and by the time the sun came up over Black Ridge, something in the town had broken open that would never close again. Lena woke in the back room of Pruitt's store with her father's arm around her and Vivian's hand on her forehead, and the first thing she did was cry, not from fear, but from the enormous relief of a child who'd been certain she'd caused something terrible and now found the world still standing. Am I in trouble? She whispered. You nearly died, Silas said, and his voice cracked on it. You nearly died, Lena. Do you understand? If Vivian hadn't known where if we'd searched the wrong... He couldn't finish. He pressed his face into his daughter's hair. Don't you ever. Don't you ever. You could have lost your life going out into that. But you weren't hurt. Lena pulled back to look at him, and her small face was fierce even in exhaustion. That's all I could think. That they hurt you and Miss Vivian at the meeting and you needed me. I couldn't just sit there, Papa. I couldn't sit warm while you were... And Silas Boone understood, holding his daughter, that he could not punish her for the exact thing he loved most about her, the thing she'd gotten from a mother who'd have done the same. The reckless, enormous heart that would rather freeze than sit safe while someone it loved was in danger. No, he said quietly. No, I don't suppose you could. He looked over her head at Vivian. It runs in the family, seems like. Seems like, Vivian said. Lena's eyes went to her. You came out in the storm too. For me. You're not even... The child stopped wrestling with something too big for 8 years. You're not even my mama, and you came out in the storm. The room went very still. No, Vivian said gently. I'm not your mama. Nobody could be your mama but the woman who was. But Lena, a person doesn't have to be your mama to come out into a storm for you. They just have to love you. And I do. That happened somewhere between the biscuits and now, and I didn't ask its permission, and I'm not sorry. Lena launched herself off her father's lap and into Vivian's arms, and Vivian, who had spent 26 years being careful, being guarded, being nobody's, and belonging to no one, held a child who was not hers, and felt the last wall she'd built around her own heart come down without a sound. They were still 3 days settling before the reckoning came, and it came as these things do, wearing the robes of the law. Because a forged letter was not just a cruelty, it was a crime. And a town that had watched Dorothea Crane manufacture a scandal, that had heard her confess to forgery, in its own church, could not simply go back to Sunday mornings as though nothing had happened. Word had traveled, and on the 4th day, a federal marshal rode up the North Road to Boone Ranch, a real one this time, badge and warrant both, because forgery to defraud and the use of the mails to do it was a matter for the territorial court, not the church council. Vivian met him in the yard, the way she met everyone without flinching. Miss Hale. The marshal was a lean, tired man with an honest face. I'm told you're the one brought the forgery to light, and I'm told you've got the proof of it, the letters. I do. Then the court's going to need them, and it's going to need you. Dorothea Crane's to stand before a territorial judge in Cheyenne, and the whole case turns on that handwriting. He paused. I'll be plain with you. A conviction on this could put an old woman in a federal prison. You understand that. What you say and what you show is what decides it. And there it was, the last test, and the hardest, and the one nobody could have seen coming. Because Vivian Hale held in a tin box in her kitchen the power to destroy Dorothea Crane completely. The woman who'd tried to ruin her. The woman who'd forged a dead man's name, dragged her 200 miles, turned a town against a grieving child. The law was handing Vivian the chance to see her enemy put in irons, and no one in Black Ridge would have blamed her for taking it. Half of them would have cheered. Silas came to stand beside her. It's your choice, he said low. Those letters are yours now. What you do with them is yours. I'll stand with whatever you decide. Vivian looked at the marshal. She looked at the letters in her mind. Nell's letters, 20 years of a young woman's love copied out in her big sister's proud hand. She thought about grief. She thought about what she'd said in the church, that grief that doesn't heal, doesn't sit still, it works, it plans, it waits for a bad winter. And she thought about the woman weeping in the doorway of Pruitt's store. I nearly did to another family what was done to mine. I'll give the court the letters, Vivian said. And I'll tell the truth about the forgery, all of it, because a crime was committed, and the law's got a right to know it. I won't lie to protect her. The marshal nodded, satisfied. But, Vivian went on, I'll also tell that judge the whole truth, that she's a woman who buried her sister at 19 and never got to grieve it in a territory with no help for a broken heart. So it went bad in her the way an untended wound goes bad. I'll tell him she confessed the moment she was caught, and that she wept over the child she nearly harmed, and that she's already lost the one thing she cared about, the whole town's belief in her, which is a punishment. Prison can't match and can't undo. I'll tell him the truth, points toward mercy, and I'll ask him for it. Not because she deserves it. Vivian's jaw set. Because I'd rather be the kind of person who asks for mercy than the kind who takes revenge. She spent 20 years being the second kind. Look what it made of her. I'm not walking down that road behind her. Silas was staring at her. The marshal, too. Most folks in your place, the marshal said slowly, would want the woman to hang for less. I know, Vivian said. That's exactly why I won't. The territorial court in Cheyenne was the strangest triumph of Vivian Hale's life, because it was a victory that looked from the outside like her defending the very woman who'd wronged her. She laid the letters before the judge. She testified plainly to the forgery, the fraudulent advertisement the reply signed in Silas Boone's stolen name. When the prosecutor pressed her, she did not soften the crime. She named it for exactly what it was. And Dorothea Crane sat through all of it with her head bowed. An old woman stripped of every weapon she'd ever carried, and did not once try to deny a word. But then, when the prosecutor had finished building his case for the harshest sentence the law allowed, Vivian asked to speak again, and the judge, curious, because in his years on the bench, he had rarely seen a victim ask to speak for the accused, allowed it. And she told the truth, the whole shape of it. The dead sister, the grief with nowhere to go, the bad winter of a soul, the confession freely given, the tears over a child nearly lost. And she asked the court to remember that the law existed to protect people from harm, and that Dorothea Crane, having lost her standing, her certainty, and the town that was the only thing she'd ever truly ruled, had already been protected against. There was no harm left in her to fear. "She's not dangerous anymore, Your Honor," Vivian said. The thing that made her dangerous was that nobody ever told her no. Nobody ever made her look at what she was doing. That's over now. A whole town watched her fall. She'll live the rest of her life among people who saw exactly what she was, and there's no prison harder than that. I'm not asking you to say what she did was small. I'm asking you to believe that mercy stops the cycle and revenge only feeds it. I've seen where revenge leads. It leads to a woman forging a dead man's name 20 years after his sweetheart died. I'd like this to end somewhere better than that. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then he did a thing that made the courtroom murmur. He handed down a sentence of restitution and public censure, formal and severe, a permanent record of the crime, but no prison. Dorothea Crane would pay, would be known forever for what she'd done, would answer to the court for years. But she would not die behind bars for a grief that had curdled. And as the gavel fell, Dorothea Crane turned in her seat and found Vivian's eyes across the courtroom, and she did not smile, because she was past smiling, but she pressed her hand flat against her own chest and bowed her head, once the way you bow to something larger than yourself. It was the closest thing to grace the woman had left in her, and it was enough. They rode home to Black Ridge, and the town that met them was not the town they'd left. Word of what Vivian had done in that Cheyenne courtroom had run ahead of the wagon that she'd had the power to destroy her enemy, and had asked the judge for mercy instead. And a town that had once whispered scandal when she stepped off a coach now came out into the street to watch her come home, and the whispering was of an entirely different kind. Mrs. Pruitt had baked. Hetty Voss had organized the church women, the same women who'd ridden out in their good bonnets to talk Vivian out of coming to the meeting, into a welcome that made Vivian have to turn her face away for a moment. The Dawson brothers, who'd ridden the storm on her word, tipped their hats as the wagon passed. Even Tommy Dawson was there, and he broke from his mother's side and ran alongside the wagon calling, "Lena, Lena, can you play now? Ma says I can play now." And Lena, who a week before had cried in a kitchen that she'd lost her only friend, leaned out of the wagon and shouted back, "Yes," with her whole heart. Cutter was waiting at the ranch, and when Vivian climbed down, he did the thing he'd done in the kitchen a lifetime ago. He put out his rough hand, but this time he didn't shake hers. This time the old man took her hand in both of his, and held it a moment, and said gruff and low, so the others wouldn't hear how much it cost him, "Judged you wrong the day you got here. Told you that already, but I want to say the rest of it now." His weathered face worked. "I've been on this ranch a long time. Watched it go dark when Mary passed. Watched that little girl stop talking. Watched Silas turn to stone. I figured this place was just going to keep dying slow, and there wasn't a thing to be done." He tightened his grip. "You came off that coach and lit the stove, and the whole place come back to life. Not just the food, all of it. So whatever happens next, you got a home here, as long as there's a Boone Ranch to have one on. That's not the boss talking. That's Cutter. And Cutter don't say things twice." Vivian, who had crossed a whole hard country, never once being told she had a home anywhere, found she could not answer him at all. So she just held on to the old man's hands, and that was answer enough. That night after Lena was asleep, Really asleep, safe and sound in a house that was warm and full again. Silas found Vivian in the kitchen, the way he always seemed to find her there, the two of them, the last awake. But it was different now, and they both knew it. "I've been trying to find a way to say something," Silas said, "for about a week now, and every time I get close to it, I lose my nerve. So I'm just going to say it badly, and you'll have to forgive the badness." Vivian set down her rag. "Say it, however. When you first came, I offered you marriage." He said it carefully. "You remember. Practical. An arrangement. To solve a problem, take the town's weapon away, keep you safe. And you turned me down flat, and you were right to, because I was offering you a business deal, dressed up as protection, and you'd have been a fool to take it, and you're not a fool." He took a breath. "I'm not offering you that anymore." Vivian's heart did something complicated. "I'm asking you something different." Silas went on, and his voice had gone rough and low and terrified in the way of a hard man saying a soft thing. "Not a practical arrangement. Not a solution to a problem. There's no problem left to solve. The town's on your side. Dorothea's finished. Lena's safe. You've got a home here, whether you ever say a word to me or not. So there's nothing in this for you to be scared of. No trap, no need. Which means, when I ask, you'll know I'm not asking, because it's useful." He stopped. His hands were shaking. "Vivian, I'm asking, because somewhere between that first ruined pot of stew and tonight, I stopped being able to imagine this kitchen without you in it. Because Lena reaches for you in her sleep. Because I did too last night, before I even woke up enough to be ashamed of it. Because I have been half a man for 2 years, and you walked in, and I remembered what the whole of me felt like. I'm not offering you a roof. You've got a roof. I'm offering you me for whatever that's worth, which isn't much, but it's all of it, and it's yours if you want it." The kitchen was very quiet, and Vivian Hale, who had said no on this very spot a week before, clear and cold, and certain who had crossed 200 miles precisely so she would never belong to anyone, stood in the warm room and understood that the thing she'd been protecting herself from all those years was not being owned. It was being this. Being seen all the way down and wanted anyway. Being asked not because she was useful, but because she was her. That was the thing that had always terrified her more than any town's judgment, because a roof could be taken and a job could end. But this could break you in a way you didn't come back from. "When I said no to you the first time," she said slowly, "it wasn't because I didn't feel anything. It was because you were offering me a bargain, and I've spent my whole life being somebody's bargain, the useful woman, the hired hands, the one who's welcome as long as she's earning her keep. I said no because a bargain would have made me exactly what Dorothea said I was, a woman who took the roof." "I know," Silas said quietly. "That's why I'm not offering the roof. I know that's why." Vivian's own voice was unsteady now, and she let it be for once unsteady. "That's the whole reason I can say what I'm about to say. Because you waited until I had nothing to gain from it. You waited until I was safe and settled and home, so that when you asked my answer, couldn't be about anything but you." She crossed the kitchen to him, this guarded man who'd learned to be careful the same hard way she had. "So here's my answer. Silas Boone and I want you to hear that it's not a bargain, and it's not a solution, and there's nothing practical about it at all." She took his shaking hands in her flower-scarred ones. "Yes. Not because I need to. Because I choose to. That's the only kind of yes I've ever wanted to give in my whole life, and you're the first person who ever let me give it." Silas Boone made a sound that was half a laugh and half something breaking open, and he pulled her in, and in the warm kitchen that had gone from a graveyard to a home in the space of a single week, he leaned down and whispered something against her hair. The thing he'd been unable to say in front of the town. The thing that was only ever meant for her. "I love you," he whispered. "I have been trying to say it for days, and it wouldn't come, and now it won't stop. I love you, Vivian. Stay. Stay and be ours, and let us be yours. I love you." And that whisper, that quiet, private, world-changing whisper, the one no town would ever hear, was the truest thing that had ever been said in Black Ridge. The wedding came in the spring, when the ridge had gone green and the whole town turned out, and it was nothing at all like the practical arrangement Silas had once offered in fear. It was a real thing, chosen freely, and Lena stood between them in a dress Vivian had sewn, her beaming holding both their hands, no longer a grieving child, but a girl with a family made whole. Dorothea Crane did not come, but she sent something a package left quietly at the ranch the morning of the wedding, with no note but a single line in that unmistakable fine hand. Inside was Nell's shawl 20 years kept, the one thing Dorothea had of her sister's youth. And the line read, "She would have wanted a good woman to have it." I was wrong about which of us was the ghost. Vivian wore it. And when the vows were said, and Silas Boone kissed his wife in front of the town that had once tried to run her out of it, the whole of Black Ridge understood at last the thing that had been true from the very first hour she stepped off that coach. She was never just a cook. She was the storm they'd all been afraid of, and she'd turned out to be the shelter. She was the stranger they'd whispered about, and she'd become the reason the town remembered how to be a town. She had walked in owning nothing, belonging to no one, and she had refused every easy escape and every practical bargain. And she had won not by becoming hard like Dorothea, not by taking the revenge the law would have allowed her, but by staying exactly stubbornly, unbreakably herself until the whole world bent to meet her. Vivian Hale had come to Black Ridge a woman alone, and she had made herself through nothing but consistency and courage and an unbending refusal to be owned into the one thing no whisper could ever touch and no town could ever take away. She had made herself the truth that outlasted the lie, and in the town that had once gone silent to judge her, and then gone silent to save her, and then gone silent in shame, there was no silence left at all, only the sound of a place that had finally learned that strength is quiet and mercy is stronger than revenge. And the woman they'd tried